Hi everybody and welcome again. Today I wanted to give you a little introduction to working with pen, ink and mark making. And I promise in the next video I will give you a beginning to end process. Ink pens can be used with any paper. Bristol board will work well both with drawing pens and dip pens. There are so many brands and types of pen you can use, and even then each of them comes in different sizes. The sizes on the side of the pen and the top of the lid are in millimeters. So the nib of this Copic multiliner is 0.05 millimeters. But the Copic and Staedtler pens are really fine. They are fantastic for small details, but they can also be very delicate. Putting too much pressure on them will misshapen and damage the nib. Don't be tempted to use them in a large area as well, as they won't look as good. 0.1 and 0.2 are quite similar to me, so I prefer to go with a 0.1. You can use them as a more all-purpose pen for medium drawings, maybe up to a 5. You can see the ink on these pens is really consistent, and that's why we will have to use them differently to pencils if we want to show different values with them. Derwent pens are good, but these are not completely waterproof. Personally, I do prefer Staedtler, and I use 0.3 in most larger drawings. 0.5 is great for thicker lines. The Staedtler pens have a rounded nib, so it's easy to use them and it's quite versatile. However, not so on larger sizes. The Sakura 0.8 has a flatter nib, so it isn't as easy to use for fluidity. It is worth changing at this point to dip pens. Brush pens can be very thick and are fun for large calligraphy works, but the tip can easily lose the crispness with use. Specialist Spectrum fine liners are pretty inexpensive and work fairly well. When buying an inexpensive pen, do a little test to ensure it is waterproof, especially if you're thinking of using watercolor on it. These Rotring pens have different nibs. Extra fine is still quite thick, but it is wonderful for quick sketching. Dip pens are a little different. They consist of little nibs of different shapes that can be attached to the holder. It's important not to share them as they get used to the way you hold them. The first one is crow quill-like. Some variation of line, but pretty consistent. The second one is brush-like, so it's very flexible and can give a variety of thickness. The third nib is similar to the first one, but a little thinner. Finally, a calligraphy nib. This is quite different as it has a little reservoir, letting you write for longer. Let's have a look at some outlining techniques and ideas. Good outlining is all about the weight of the line. This means how thick or thin it is. A good way of achieving this for beginners is to choose one of two areas to thicken up, outward or inward areas. As you can see, this will help give an instant sense of volume. Now let's practice our mark making. This exercise will allow you to explore how to make areas lighter and darker, as well as force you to be a little bit more creative with your mark making. I'm going to divide my page in different areas, not too many and not too big. Then I'm drawing a light bulb in the corner here to signify which areas will be lighter. Each smaller area should have its own really light to really dark areas. The first type of mark making we'll do is hatching. This consists of parallel lines. To make some areas darker, simply add lines up to more or less half the way through, then again to the middle of the last one, then again the same thing. You should saturate and overlap to make areas darker. The thing most people ask me when mark making is, where do I stop the dark areas? Well, the best thing to do is to work as you would with a pencil. So do the lightest areas first, then work your way through to make things darker. Add little lines to make it look like the white areas belong, like it doesn't just jump from mark making to no marks at all. Cross-hatching involves drawing parallel lines in different directions. If the first layer or tone is vertical, then the second one should be horizontal, the third could be diagonal left, the next diagonal right, so on and so forth, until you find the tone that you want. Now I will show you how to create a sense of volume when drawing straight hair. Usually, people draw it as a whole, which can look like a bunch of random lines. It is better to do it in parts to emulate how hair clumps out naturally. Stippling is like Marmite, you either love it or hate it. If you hate it, it can be incredibly boring, but if you don't, it is possibly the most relaxing type of mark making. You don't have to think too much about it and it becomes almost meditative. It is also probably the one that takes the longest. It's easy to make a drawing look good when stippling, since all you are using are dots, but take your time and don't drag your pen. The moment you get little tails on your stippling, it loses its charm. To make a gravel-like texture, start with little oval shapes. Around it, add smaller ones, dots, little random marks to make a cluttered pattern. Next, I think I'll make some fish scales. I'm starting from the top and making each of them between the two scales above. The light is coming from the right, so I'm adding some hatching to show shade under the scales, and then I will add an overall tone also with hatching to show the area that is furthest from the light. When I start running out of ideas, I look at the world around me. What can I see? What textures and patterns are there? Many students get stuck at this time, not knowing what to do, but this is when you should observe. Ask a friend, go on the internet, you name it. Just don't accept being stuck. Patches are one of my favorite things to do. It consists of little areas of parallel lines in one direction, next to a similar patch going in a different direction. They are a good way to add orderly tone to a darker area with mark making. However, they can look a little unfinished if you're not careful. Make sure the ends of the lines are touching the patches near them. There should be no empty spaces between them. We'll make a weaving pattern, make sure it's quite organic and not too stiff, and let's swap to one of the dip pen nibs. You'll notice that it is much easier to make your marks look fluid and play with the weight of the line when you're using a dip pen, and I personally really enjoy it. Now, some artists and designers prefer to make their hatching and cross-hatching really neat. Believe it or not, it's even more important that you take your time, as the rigidity of the ruler makes mistakes look even more out of place. As you can see, when I rushed, my hatching started to clump up, so take your time. If you choose to use a ruler, you should also make sure that you can see the line you made before, by starting from the top and working your way down, or if you're right-handed, starting from the right, if you're left-handed, starting from the left. This will help you adjust your lines to the lines before and make them look more parallel. And there you go. I hope that helped, and good luck in your own exercise. See you next time!